The story of convert James Yi, the first Muslim imam in the U.S. military, who witnessed detainees being tortured and the Quran insulted at Guantanamo. James Yi was the first Muslim imam in the United States military assigned to the torture camp for Muslim prisoners at Guantanamo. Quoted from republica.co.id, before becoming a Muslim, Yi was a priest who served and protected the rights of U.S. military personnel to practice their religion. This meant providing religious support, taking services and advising commanders in religion, ethics, and morals, recalled Yi as reported by The Guardian, Friday, 4/6. Yi was raised in New Jersey as a Lutheran and was still a Christian when he graduated from the military academy at West Point. However, an encounter opened his heart to Islam because of its similarities with other Abrahamic religions. "I took the Shahada in 1991, he recalled. Graduating from West Point, Yi chose to live in Syria and learn to read the Quran properly. At that time, the U.S. military was serving as imam for U.S. military Muslim personnel. So I was first stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, he said. Several years later, Yi was transferred to Guantanamo Bay. His wife is from Syria, but she has no family in the U.S. Yi has a baby girl. We just settled in, but the Army insisted. I was flattered to be offered the challenge. Exactly a year after 9/11, I was sent to Guantanamo to become a priest there, he said. Yi arrived at Guantanamo Bay in November 2002. Yi served at Camp Delta, a permanent detention camp where detainees are held individually in cells made of steel mesh. It was something the outside world didn't know about at the time. I worked from sunup to sundown in chaotic conditions, where prisoners were abused and humiliated every day, he said. During daily visits, detainees often told Yi about what they experienced in interrogation sessions. Yi witnessed firsthand what the prisoners experienced, such as several broken teeth and many bruises that reappeared. Apart from physical abuse, most of the direct complaints he received were about religious abuse. The guards abuse the Quran and make the prisoners submit in a vicious circle. The military officially states that torture does not occur at Guantanamo. As an insider, I know this is a lie. Some guards were nice, while others were rude, he said. I know who might be rude when I go to the scene. They will alert other guards with shouts of, "There's a priest on the block." There were 3 prisoners held in separate locations, Camp Iguana, because they were only 12 to 14 years old. The guards there are very good, he said. Yi led the Friday prayers. However, this sparked FBI suspicion. Because of this, FBI agents always monitor our activities, he said. When Yi began sending official reports about how prisoners were being mistreated, he was accused of siding with terrorists. It became clear that the officers in charge wanted me out. I was marginalized and under surveillance, he said. Nearing the end of his assignment, Yi took a 2-week leave of absence, intending to return to Fort Lewis to arrange everything for the return of his wife and daughter. I left the base and took a plane to Jacksonville Naval Station in Florida. When we landed, I was taken into a room and questioned by the FBI. I was charged with spying, espionage, aiding the enemy, rebellion, and sedition, he recalled. After being held in Florida for 6 days, Yi was transferred to Charleston, South Carolina, where Yi spent 70 days in solitary confinement. On the way there, I couldn't see anything, like I saw at Guantanamo. It was a terrible ordeal. Even though I was cleared of all charges and returned to Fort Lewis, it became clear that I was not believed, he said. The Bush administration, according to Yi, failed America and the world in the most grievous way. They set up a prison at Guantanamo Bay in the belief that it was lawful. From the start, Yi said, Bush knew most of the prisoners were innocent, but they kept them there because releasing them would look bad. I had high hopes for Barack Obama when he said he would close the prison camps, but those hopes were dashed. It is Joe Biden's obligation now to fulfill Obama's promises. Today, I work with veterans, using art to help them deal with the impact of war. I left so I could tell my story, to tell the truth about Guantanamo. I've been doing that ever since, he said. James Yi slandered Muslim officer. James Yi is an American of Confucian Chinese descent. He was born in New Jersey in 1968 with the name Yu Bo Kang, alias Yi Bak Hong. The name James was his baptismal name because his parents had abandoned their old beliefs and embraced Protestant Christianity. Young James then decided to enter the American Military Academy at West Point, and after he graduated, he met a friend who introduced him to Islam. James feels that his heart is now at peace after converting to Islam. In 1993, James took a leave of absence from military service and went to Syria to study Islam. It was there that he met a Palestinian Arab woman named Huda, whom he would become his wife. After returning to America, James studied again at the Academy of Islamic and Social Sciences in Virginia. Armed with this diploma, he can now work in the military as a spiritual officer and imam for the American military, with responsibility for serving the spiritual needs of American Muslim soldiers. Because of James's extensive knowledge and polite attitude, he succeeded in reducing tensions between Muslim and non-Muslim American soldiers, stating that Islam was a religion of peace and had nothing to do with terrorism. The American Armed Forces then entrusted James to become a spiritual officer at Guantanamo prison to guide ex-Taliban prisoners. However, this placement would be the beginning of the disaster that befell his life. At the same time, the September 11th tragedy occurred. The American Minister of Defense of German descent, Donald Rumsfeld, initiated the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He also instructed that ex-Taliban prisoners be tortured. At Guantanamo prison, James quickly became friendly with the prisoners because he understood Arabic. However, it broke his heart to see the prisoners being tortured. The guards also tore up the Quran and ordered the prisoners to mop the floor with shredded Quran paper. Sometimes they also ordered the prisoners to pray in the middle of the pentagram circle while swearing that their God was the devil and not Allah. When James protested this to senior officers, they instead nicknamed James the Chinese Taliban. Of course, because this was all designed by Donald Rumsfeld. Suddenly, James was called back to America, and sure enough, he was immediately arrested by the authorities and thrown into naval prison in North Carolina on charges of conspiring with the Taliban and leaking military secrets. James was detained for 76 days before being acquitted of all charges. Like falling down a ladder, after being released he was charged with new charges, namely lying to investigators, adultery, and accessing pornography from a government computer. Later the charges were dropped and he was honorably discharged from the military. However, this case made James's wife depressed, and James experienced economic difficulties because he had to go into debt to pay a lawyer. James, who had experienced many problems, then wrote about his experiences in a book entitled For God and Country. From the title alone, it is clear that he wants to emphasize that he is loyal to America and cannot possibly betray his country or corps. But for this, he received an additional reward. He was prohibited from traveling abroad. Captain Yi's life story. A few days after the events of September 11th, Captain James J. Yi, an Islamic spiritual leader who served at the Fort Lewis Army Base, received a new assignment. According to those who have heard his lectures, wherever he goes, he always conveys that Islam is not a religion of violence. At military bases, churches, mosques, campuses, and on the streets of Olympia, the city where he lives with his wife and daughter. The tenacity of Captain Yi, 35 years old, in conveying Islam is recognized by people who know him. The same tenacity has made him a wrestling champion in high school, graduate from the West Point Military Academy, and become a firm convert to Islam. He also carried this tenacity when last year he was assigned to foster Muslim prisoners at the Guantanamo Bay prison, Cuba. In that place, it was Captain Yi who made the call to prayer sound 5 times a day throughout the prison via a loudspeaker. If his CD player is damaged, he himself sings the call to prayer through a microphone. It was part of his job, he said in an interview last April, to mediate misunderstandings between prisoners and prison officials. "I advised the base commander on respect for religion and assistance with the worship facilities here," said Captain Yi. "But most importantly, I was useful in easing various tensions within the camp." Captain Yi left Guantanamo 2 weeks ago for home. But before he had time to meet his family, last September 10th military officials arrested him somewhere in Florida and detained him at a military base in South Carolina. Since then, he has continued to be investigated on suspicion of spying at Guantanamo. Military officials declined to say why Captain Yi, who has not been charged, was being questioned so intensively. Other legal officials said the investigation was directed at suspicions of spying, misguided assistance to detainees, or other possible violations of military duty. A military official said yesterday that Captain Yi was found to have drawn layouts of prisoners in the camp, lists of who were the interrogators and who were being interrogated, as well as notes about what was asked. The official, who declined to be identified, said one of the reasons for suspicion about Captain Yi was because he had been seen with two other military members who were under surveillance. It is not clear whether one of the two people is Senior Airman Ahmad Ri al-Halabi, a former translator at Guantanamo, who is accused of spying and sending military secrets to Syria. Military officials would not reveal the names of Captain Yi's legal advisors. Under U.S. military law, any detainee must be brought to justice within 120 days of his arrest. Those who knew Captain Yi in Olympia said they were surprised to hear the news of his arrest. Yi has lived in the city for the past 4 years and is active in the local mosque. Sometimes he leads prayers and gives Friday sermons in place of his imam. According to those who knew him, Yi always emphasized the existence of misunderstandings about Islam after September 11, 2001. They also said, Yi always emphasized his steadfast loyalty to the United States and to its military service. The man had been registered as a spiritual director at the 29th Sandy Battalion at Fort Lewis. "I think he's the exact opposite of a spy," said Imam Muhammad Joban of the Olympia Islamic Center, where Captain Yi prays in congregation and leads about 300 people, mostly immigrants from Cambodia. He is loyal to his country. He is trying to help this country understand Islam better, that Islam is not a violent religion, as people think. Imam Joban said he was shocked to hear of Captain Yi's arrest. "The entire congregation was shocked," he said in an interview today. "He's not the kind of person to do that. If you met Yi, you wouldn't believe it. He is quiet and humble. I am sure he will not harm his own country." Imam Joban said Captain Yi returned to Olympia from Guantanamo in March, after 6 months on duty, and was told by the army that he had been reassigned there. "I asked Yi, how?" Imam Joban recalled. Then he admitted that he felt it was difficult being away from his family, but he said, "I am a military man, and I have to serve this country." According to Imam Joban, Captain Yi never talked about the conditions at Guantanamo or showed concern about the prisoners, but instead concentrated on how he worked to meet the spiritual needs of the prisoners. In an interview last April, Captain Yi said he ensured that the meat served to around 660 prisoners was guaranteed halal. He told Imam Joban that he had insisted that each prisoner have a copy of the Quran and that each cell be provided with a cloth mask that could be hung from the ceiling so that the copies of the Quran did not have to lie on the ground. Captain Yi, the son of a Chinese immigrant family, was raised as a Protestant, Lutheran Christian in Springfield, New Jersey, about 20 miles west of Manhattan, New York. After taking the Shahada in the early 1990s, he studied in Syria, where he met his soulmate, a Syrian girl, and strengthened his Islam. When he joined the military service in Saudi Arabia, he told his life journey in an interview with the New York Times. In October 2001, according to Yi, his education in Syria did not meet the requirements of a military spiritual director, so he was given a letter of accreditation by the Graduate School of Islamic and Social Sciences in Leesburg, Virginia, which has been certified by the military to train spiritual formations. However, the head of the school, Dr. Taha Jabir al-Alwani, stated in an interview today that although the school had trained 9 Muslim spiritual directors, it had never trained or given a certificate to Captain Yi. "We never even knew this person," Taha said. "We have nothing to do with it." Captain Yi's parents, who live in Springfield, where he grew up, declined to comment, as did other family members. A sign placed on the front door of his house read, "Sorry, no journalists or media." His wife, Huda Yi, who lives in their apartment in Olympia with Yi's biological mother, declined to talk about the case. However, she corrected the mistake that appeared in several newspapers, that her husband had changed his name to Youssef. According to him, the name was his affectionate nickname, and the Arabic name for Yi's father, Joseph, because Yi's biological mother's tongue was easier to say Youssef than James. "All the newspapers said he changed his name," said Yi's wife. "That's not true. He never changed his name. He liked the name." Imam Joban said Captain Yi's wife called him a few days ago and admitted she was very worried. because she had been waiting for Yi for several hours at the Seattle-Tacoma airport and didn't know where to look until a few days later, a lawyer told her that the husband has been arrested. Hoda still hasn't had any contact with her husband, Imam Joban said. In an interview with this newspaper, Captain Yi, who was born in the city of Naperville, Illinois State, said he first became interested in Islam in 1991, after getting to know several Egyptian army officers who were in the same class as him while attending transportation education at Fort Knox, Kentucky. After observing Egyptian officers fasting during the month of Ramadan, he said, "It seemed to inspire me to go and learn it myself." He professed his Shahada in April 1991, and in August was assigned to Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War. Captain Yi said he often visited a tent at the Khobar Towers military base, which provided books and brochures about Islam in English, sponsored by the Saudi government. In 1993, the story goes, the Air Force and the Saudi royal family paid for him and several Americans to perform the Hajj, an obligation every Muslim makes at least once in their lifetime. He performed another Hajj 2 years later, and sought the possibility of studying Islamic theology and science, as well as Arabic in the Middle East. "I don't want to study my religion in a secular institution," he said. "I want to go and learn from traditional methods, so learn directly from Muslim scholars in the Middle East." Yi arrived at the Abu Nur Madrasa in Damascus, Syria, led by Sheikh Ahmad Kuftaro, the Grand Mufti of Syria, the highest religious leader, and affiliated with the Syrian government. At the madrasa, he studied with other Muslim students from various parts of the world. Ingrid Mattson, a professor at the McDonald Center for Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations at Hartford Seminary, said the madrasas in Damascus are oriented towards Sufism, a sect that is less militant and more spiritual and avoids politics. According to my knowledge and from various conversations with American Muslims who have studied there, the madrasas teach a very traditional and spiritual Islam, and moreover, the Syrian government does not allow political elements to be taught in its madrasas, said Mattson. After 4 years in Damascus, Captain Yi returned to the U.S. in December 1999. Yi was immediately invited to take part in a Ramadan program at the Pentagon by a former Marine combat sergeant who met him while performing the Hajj, Qasima Uqda. This man then encouraged him to apply to become a military spiritual director. At that time, Uqda was an important figure in recruiting and nominating several candidates for military spiritual guidance. Now Uqda does not answer telephone calls or email messages. In Captain Yi's hometown of Springfield, there is now much talk about the mysterious situation facing Jimmy. Yi was remembered by his classmates and former wrestling coach as a serious and honest boy, who worked as a newspaper boy and admired his skill in the sport of wrestling. Rick Iacono, Captain Yi's wrestling coach, admitted that he was the one who recruited Yi to his school's wrestling team, even though he only weighed about 50 kilos in high school. According to Iacono, his former student appeared impressive because he always concentrated on what he was doing. Yi remains on good terms with Iacono and occasionally visits his former school, Jonathan Dayton High School, and chats about wrestling with the students. Iacono said he received email messages from Captain Yi after September 11th, asking everyone he wrote to not to judge all Muslims as terrorists. "He was really serious about it, to the point where I felt bad," Iacono said.